Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide our viewers are tuning in. Now imagine that Rimuru, the calculating, suddenly enters the no-game, no-life universe. What happens next? Let's find out. The sky above Disboard fractures without warning. Not with thunder, not with war drums, not with the kind of apocalyptic pressure that usually announces the arrival of a demon lord. It simply bends, like glass under silent strain. And from that distortion, a familiar blue silhouette drops into a field of checkered stone and floating dice-shaped mountains. Rimuru Tempest lands lightly, reforming from slime into his human form. Silver blue hair catching the sun that never seems to move in this world. His golden eyes narrow, not in fear, but in assessment. He expects hostility. He expects killing intent. He expects the pulse of magic signatures flaring in defense. Instead, he feels nothing. No assassins rushing from the shadows, no armies preparing spells. Just wind moving across banners and the distant sound of laughter. Great Sage begins scanning automatically. Atmosphere stable. Magical density is unusually structured. Energy signatures restrained by an unknown binding law. Rimuru lifts his hand and condenses a small sphere of magic, barely enough to knock down a wall. A test. A whisper of power compared to what he truly holds. The sphere stabilizes in his palm for half a second, then dissolves into harmless particles before it can be released. Not countered, not absorbed, invalidated. That makes him pause. A group of armored knights are shouting across a marble courtyard nearby. On the opposite end stand nobles in elaborate capes, glaring with venom that promises bloodshed. Rimuru prepares for impact. Tension builds. Hands move toward swords. Magic circles flicker into existence. And then, instead of charging, both sides sit down at a long table. A chessboard is placed between them. The hatred does not disappear. It concentrates. Rimuru watches as one knight makes a move. A bishop advances. Across the board, a queen piece falls. At that exact moment, one of the nobles behind the losing side collapses to his knees, his crest glowing before fading from his cloak. Territory lost. Authority transferred. No blade drawn, no spell cast. Yet the result is absolute. Great Sage completes its analysis. This world operates under enforced metaphysical contracts. Violence is not suppressed. It is impossible. Conflict must be resolved through structured games governed by binding pledges. All outcomes are recognized as reality itself. Rimuru looks down at his hand again. The power that once shook empires now feels like a sealed artifact. He is still strong. His existence has not diminished. But strength here has no outlet, no battlefield, no domination through force. A child's laughter echoes from behind him. Rimuru turns slowly. Floating above a stone pillar sits a small figure with vibrant hair and eyes filled with amusement that borders on omniscience. The presence is light, almost playful, but the authority radiating from him is undeniable. This is not a king, not a spirit, something higher. The being tilts his head, studying Rimuru like a new piece added to an ancient board. Rimuru feels it immediately. This world has a referee, and that referee is watching. The small figure kicks his legs casually in the air as if seated on an invisible throne. His smile is neither hostile nor welcoming. It is curious. Rimuru does not need Great Sage to confirm what his instincts already whisper. This is the axis of the world, the rule maker, the one who turned war into entertainment and conflict into mathematics. Rimuru does not bow. He does not threaten either. He simply observes. The childlike god grins wider, clearly entertained by the lack of reaction. Most beings would kneel. Others would panic. Rimuru evaluates. Without speaking aloud, the pressure of information presses against him. 10 absolute laws woven into the foundation of reality itself. No murder, no theft. All disputes resolved through games. Wagers binding, outcomes final. Even memory can be claimed as a prize. The rules are not suggestions. They are structural pillars. To reject them is to reject existence here. Rimuru's gaze shifts back to the courtyard. The chess match ends. A king piece tips over. Across the plaza, banners physically change color. Soldiers switch allegiance mid-breath, compelled not by mind control, but by contractual truth. The losing faction kneels, stripped of territory, authority, and pride. Not one drop of blood stains the marble floor. Yet the devastation is undeniable. He considers the implications. In his world, power bends others by force or overwhelming presence. Here, power bends probability. Strength lies in strategy, deception, foresight. A demon lord who cannot throw a punch is just another participant. Rimuru reforms into slime form briefly, slipping across the polished ground to test resistance. Even that small action triggers a faint shimmer under him, like invisible grid lines mapping every movement. This world tracks everything. Nothing occurs outside its structured consent. Great Sage proposes simulation analysis of potential rule breaking. Probability of bypassing world law directly registers at near zero without catastrophic backlash. Countermeasure unknown. Source authority classified as divine level. Rimuru reforms into human shape again. Folding his arms, he could attempt brute override. He could escalate output to absurd levels and test the limits, but that would be careless. And he is not careless. He is calculating. A distant explosion draws his attention, not from a spell, from cheering. Two races face off in an arena shaped like a colossal board. Winged beings hover above while beast-like warriors crouch below. Instead of charging, they roll dice the size of carriages. Each number dictates environmental shifts. Forest tiles rise, desert tiles collapse. Water floods specific zones according to predetermined algorithms. Strategy adapts in real time. Rimuru watches as one participant loses a round. Instantly, magical wings vanish from their back. Not injured, removed as penalty. Ability confiscated by game condition. The crowd roars in approval. That is when the weight of it truly settles. In this world, even evolution can be wagered. Even identity can be placed on the board. A subtle ripple passes through the air around Rimuru. He feels it this time. Not suppression, registration. The system has acknowledged him as a player, not an intruder, a participant. Above, the childlike god leans forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand, eyes gleaming with interest. Rimuru meets that gaze directly. No fear, no challenge. Just a silent agreement. If this world runs on games, then he will play. But he will not play as a pawn. For the first time since arriving, a faint smile touches his lips. Not excitement, not arrogance. Adaptation. If power cannot be unleashed, it will be redirected. If violence is forbidden, victory must be engineered. And somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, Raphael begins reorganizing its entire analytical framework, no longer calculating battlefield destruction, but probability matrices, behavioral prediction models, and rule exploitation scenarios. Rimuru has entered a world where strength is meaningless, which means he will have to redefine what strength is. The air shifts again, subtle but unmistakable. It is not a magic gathering for an attack. It is a tension. Across Disboard, something has noticed the anomaly. Not just the god watching from above, but players, strategists, minds that survive on the scent of disruption. Rimuru can almost feel calculations forming somewhere far beyond the horizon. He steps into the arena where the dice-driven battle continues. No one stops him. No guard challenges him. That alone tells him everything. This world does not fear intruders. It absorbs them. A crystalline panel materializes in front of him, covered in symbols and text written in a language he does not recognize. Raphael translates instantly. Invitation to participate. Terms of engagement. Wager declaration required. Rimuru scans the conditions. The current game determines territorial control over a minor border state. Losing party forfeits land, resources, and one declared asset. The asset can be tangible or abstract. Skill, memory, title, authority. Interesting. He looks at the winged race hovering above the board. Flugel. Their expressions are confident, almost bored. Below them, the beast-like war beasts move with restrained intensity, their eyes sharp with instinctive calculation. Neither side acknowledges Rimuru yet. He is not bound to either faction. He is unclaimed. The god above tilts his head again, as if silently asking whether the new arrival will test the system. Rimuru does something unexpected. He declares himself a third-party challenger. The arena falls silent for half a second. Then murmurs ripple outward. That is not how most games unfold. A three-way structure forms instantly. The board expands, reshaping itself to accommodate an additional faction. New tiles generate from thin air. Mountains rise, rivers carve themselves across fresh land. The rules rewrite without hesitation. This world is flexible within its structure. It rewards participation. Rimuru studies the evolving terrain. Dice determine environmental shifts, but player decisions determine positioning and resource allocation. The war beasts rely on predictive behavior reading. The Flugel relies on overwhelming magical calculation speed. Raphael begins processing both styles simultaneously. Probability trees branch outward at impossible speed. The first dice roll favors the Flugel. A high number. Elevated terrain manifests beneath them, granting strategic superiority. They reposition with precision. The war beasts counter by sacrificing 2 units to bait overextension, a clever move. Rimuru waits. He does not rush a play. He observes patterns. Every action here carries layered intention, bluff within bluff. When his turn activates, a faint glow outlines his territory. The arena expects input. Instead of advancing aggressively, Rimuru deliberately weakens one of his flanks, placing a key unit within apparent striking distance of both factions. Gasps echo from the spectators. It looks like ignorance or arrogance. The Flugel immediately exploits it. They descend with calculated precision, seizing the exposed tile. The war beasts hesitate. Their leader narrows his eyes. Something feels wrong. Raphael confirms projected outcome divergence in 3 moves. Rimuru rolls the dice, a low number. Murmurs grow louder. His territory shrinks under environmental collapse. From the outside, it appears he is losing. But the exposed unit was never the objective. It was data collection. Both factions revealed their response patterns, their prioritization hierarchies, their risk thresholds. On his next turn, Rimuru sacrifices that same unit entirely, triggering a conditional clause within the game rules that redistributes terrain control based on contested adjacency. The arena glows violently as ownership lines redraw. The elevated ground the Flugel relied on fractures, splitting their formation. The war beasts attempt to pivot, but the redistribution favors neither of them. It favors the third faction, Rimuru's faction. In 3 calculated moves, he converts a perceived blunder into spatial dominance. The crowd falls quiet. Above, the god laughs softly. Not mockery, delight. Rimuru does not smile. He is not here to entertain. He is confirming something far more important. The rules are rigid, but interpretation is elastic. There are seams in this world, not flaws, opportunities. The next dice roll determines resource allocation. The war beasts gamble high, wagering enhanced sensory prediction as a temporary boost. The Flugel counter with magical amplification. Both escalate the stakes. Rimuru declares his wager calmly, processing acceleration. The arena acknowledges it. Raphael's analytical speed increases beyond its previous ceiling, adapting not through force, but through contract. The system accepts the trade. For the first time since arriving, Rimuru feels power returning to him. Not destructive force, not an overwhelming aura, but influence, legal, recognized, undeniable influence. He is not breaking the rules. He is using them better than anyone else on the board. The shift is immediate. With processing acceleration contractually recognized, Raphael's calculations no longer press against invisible resistance. They flow cleanly through the framework of the game itself. Rimuru is no longer testing the system from the outside. He is operating within its bloodstream. The Flugel commander reacts first. Wings flare with radiant energy as she initiates a high-risk maneuver, sacrificing long-term mobility for immediate dominance over the central tiles. It is a show of confidence, the kind born from centuries of winning through superior magical cognition. The War Beast leader answers with instinctive precision, predicting her trajectory and redirecting his units to encircle what appears to be Rimuru's expanding territory. From the perspective of the audience, it becomes a two-front collapse. Rimuru stands at the center of converging threats. His landmass shrinks again under environmental shifts triggered by the dice. Forest tiles convert to wasteland. Supply lines narrow. He does not rush. Raphael maps not only the board, but the players. Micro-expressions. Timing delays between decisions. The War Beast leader trusts instinct over algorithms. The Flugel commander trusts computation over adaptability. Both are elite. Both are predictable within their excellence. Rimuru selects a seemingly defensive option, consolidating his remaining units into a compact formation near a volatile tile marked with layered conditional triggers. Spectators whisper. Defensive clustering invites annihilation in most scenarios. The next roll activates the volatile tile. A cascade effect begins. Terrain reclassification spreads outward from Rimuru's position like a chain reaction. The elevated ground the Flugel claimed earlier becomes unstable. Their amplified magic output now drains resources at double cost due to environmental incompatibility. The War Beasts attempt to capitalize, lunging toward what they believe is weakened prey. That is when Rimuru executes the sequence Raphael calculated 8 turns ago. He invokes a rule clause tied to multi-faction adjacency, forcing a temporary alliance resolution between the two dominant races due to shared proximity conflict. For a single turn, they are barred from direct engagement with him while recalibrating territorial claims between themselves. The board flashes, contracts bind. The War Beast leader realizes the trap a second too late. Their predictive focus had locked onto Rimuru, leaving flank exposure toward the Flugel. The Flugel commander, now resource-strained, cannot sustain aerial dominance long enough to exploit the opening fully. Both factions bleed positional advantage while recalculating. Rimuru advances once, only once. It is not flashy. It is not overwhelming. It is precise. His units occupy the only stable resource hub left on the board, a title neither faction prioritized because its long-term value required short-term sacrifice. The arena falls into complete silence. Within 5 turns, the outcome becomes mathematically inevitable. The War Beasts exhaust predictive reserves, attempting to compensate. The Flugel overclocks their magical amplification and triggers self-imposed penalties. Rimuru does not press aggressively. He does not need to. He allows the structure of the game to conclude what he already engineered. The final dice roll lands softly against the marble. A moderate number. Enough. Ownership lines redraw one last time. The border state shifts entirely under Rimuru's faction. The crystalline panels update across the arena. Victory acknowledged. Wagers enforced. A pulse of light spreads outward as the losing faction's declared assets transfer. The War Beasts lose a portion of their enhanced predictive range for a defined duration. The Flugel forfeit a fragment of magical amplification authority within this territory, not permanently crippled, but undeniably weakened. Rimuru feels the transfer register through the system, not absorbed into his body like a devoured skill. Logged under his faction's authority within Disboard, recognized, legal. He exhales slowly. This was not a demonstration of dominance. It was reconnaissance, a proof of concept. The rules can be bent through interpretation. Power can be reclaimed through contract. Influence can be accumulated without a single strike thrown. Above the arena, the god watches with shining eyes, laughter barely contained. This is interesting now. Across distant lands, word will spread. An unknown being entered, disboard and defeated 2 advanced races in his first registered match. Not through luck, not through chaos, through adaptation. Rimuru turns his gaze upward, meeting the god's stare without hesitation. The message is silent, but unmistakable. If this world runs on games, then he will master the game. And somewhere far away, 2 siblings who have never lost begin to feel the faintest ripple in their perfect equilibrium. The news does not travel by messenger. It travels by tension. Across taverns in Elkia, across floating libraries guarded by ancient spells, across hidden war rooms where maps are redrawn nightly, one name begins to circulate, not shouted, not announced, calculated. A third faction, a player who entered a live match between 2 advanced races and walked away with control. Inside the royal library of Elkia, sunlight filters through towering stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across endless shelves of strategy manuals and game records. At the center of the room sit 2 figures who do not react like the rest of the world. They do not panic. They do not speculate. They observe. Sora leans back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head, eyes half closed but intensely awake. Shiro sits beside him, expression unreadable. A handheld console resting lightly in her palms as numbers scroll across the screen too quickly for ordinary minds to follow. They have already reconstructed the entire 3-way match from fragments of witness accounts and magical recordings. Every move, every hesitation, every rule is exploitation. Sora exhales slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting. Interesting. Shiro does not smile. Her fingers move once more across the console. Probability matrix complete. She turns the screen slightly toward him. A single number glows. It is not low. For the first time since arriving in Disboard, blank does not hold absolute certainty. The door to the library opens without a sound. A court official steps inside, nervous but composed. He kneels and presents a crystalline message tablet. A formal request has been submitted. A challenge. Sora takes the tablet casually, scanning the contents. The challenger has not demanded territory, not wealth, no authority over Elkia. The wager is something else entirely. Recognition. If blank wins, Rimuru will declare allegiance to Elkia for a defined duration. If Rimuru wins, he gains unrestricted access to all recorded game histories within the kingdom. Sora laughs quietly. That is not the wager of someone seeking power. That is the wager of someone gathering information. Shiro tilts her head. Analysis. She speaks only one word. Dangerous. Meanwhile, in a quiet courtyard overlooking Elkia's skyline, Rimuru stands alone, watching flags ripple across the capital. He felt the shift long before the official message arrived. Attention focusing, a gravitational pull of intelligence. The strongest players in this world are not warriors. They are thinkers, and he has just announced himself as one of them. Raphael completes background synthesis. Blank, undefeated. Psychological synchronization between the 2 individuals exceeds normal cooperative parameters. Their decision-making operates as a unified system rather than 2 separate entities. Predictive modeling indicates extreme difficulty in exploiting standard human cognitive flaws. Rimuru smiles faintly. That makes this worthwhile. He accepts the challenge. The location is selected by mutual agreement, a neutral grand arena constructed specifically for high-tier matches. The structure itself is an architectural marvel, a fusion of floating geometric platforms and shifting glass floors beneath which entire landscapes can be projected. Thousands gather in silence, not because they expect violence, but because they expect brilliance. Blank enters without ceremony. No grand announcement, no dramatic entrance. Just 2 siblings walking side by side, eyes scanning the environment as if it were already part of a solved equation. Muru steps forward in human form, posture relaxed, gaze steady. There is no hostility in the air, only anticipation. A crystalline interface descends between them, illuminating the terms. The game will not be chess, not simple territory conquest. It will be a multi-layered strategic simulation incorporating economic manipulation, resource control and psychological bluffing. A compressed world model. Sora glances at Rimuru with open curiosity. Shiro studies him without blinking. This is not a battle of strength. It is a confrontation of systems. The arena transforms the moment all three place their hands on the crystalline interface. The glass floor beneath them dissolves into depth, revealing a living map forming layer by layer. Continents rise from nothing. Oceans carve boundaries. Cities ignite as points of light. Trade routes shimmer faintly between regions like neural pathways inside a brain. This is not a single board. It is a world compressed into a controlled structure. Every variable matters. Food supply, political loyalty, information flow, even morale. Sora studies the projection with visible excitement. This is his domain, a battlefield where blades are replaced by leverage. Shiro's eyes move rapidly, absorbing numerical patterns as if they are music. Rimuru closes his eyes for half a second. Raphael synchronizes with the simulation. Data streams cascade through his perception. Population density curves, resource distribution gradients, probable unrest triggers. The rules finalize. Each side governs a developing nation. Victory is achieved through total influence dominance, not annihilation. You do not destroy your opponent. You render them obsolete. The opening phase begins. Blank moves first. Sora immediately initiates aggressive economic expansion, investing heavily in trade infrastructure at the cost of short-term stability. It looks reckless to casual observers, but Shiro adjusts taxation ratios simultaneously, stabilizing internal metrics before any deficit manifests. They are not reacting to the present board, they are shaping the next 10 turns. Rimuru does not counter economically. Instead, he invests in education and information networks within his simulated nation. Universities rise, communication lines strengthen. To the audience, it appears passive, too slow. Sora notices. His grin widens slightly. He assumes long-term positioning. He increases pressure, sending controlled trade imbalances toward Rimuru's borders, subtly siphoning resources through market manipulation. Raphael calculates thousands of response options. An optimal counter involves direct economic retaliation. Probability of neutralizing blank strategy at 48%. Rimuru rejects it. Instead, he allows the imbalance to continue for 3 turns. Spectators murmur. It looks like mismanagement. Blank consolidates wealth. Their nation's influence spreads into neutral territories. Shiro's fingers pause for a fraction of a second. That delay is microscopic but real. Because while Blank accumulates wealth, Rimuru's education investment begins generating something less visible. Innovation modifiers activate, policy flexibility increases. Civil unrest probability decreases to near 0. On the 4th turn, Rimuru introduces a cultural export program, harmless on the surface, artistic exchanges, philosophical texts, entertainment distribution. Sora laughs. Soft power. Cute. But Disboard recognizes influence not only through currency, but through voluntary allegiance. Smaller neutral states begin aligning ideologically with Rimuru's nation. No contracts forced, no wagers triggered. They choose alignment because the internal stability metrics are higher. Blank shifts tactics instantly. Shiro initiates a calculated crisis within Rimuru's borders by triggering a rumor cascade event embedded in the simulation. Political distrust spreads. Confidence falters. For most players, that would spiral into collapse. Raphael identifies the origin pattern in seconds. Rimuru does not suppress the rumor. He amplifies transparency instead. Public data release, policy reforms. Leadership visibility metrics spike. The simulated citizens respond with increased loyalty rather than fear. Sora leans forward now, interest sharpened. The economic lead Blank built is still significant, but influence is no longer measured purely in currency. It is measured in voluntary cohesion. Turn by turn, the gap narrows. Not because Rimuru is outspending them, because he is altering the metric of victory. The arena lights pulse softly as influence values update. Blank remains ahead, but the certainty margin has decreased. For the first time in the match, Shiro's eyes narrow slightly. Not frustration, focus. They have found an opponent who does not chase the same objectives, and that makes the game unpredictable. Blank responds the only way they know how. They escalate. Sora shifts from economic dominance to strategic destabilization. If Rimuru refuses to compete on currency, then pressure the structure itself. Trade agreements with neutral nations are quietly rewritten, embedding clauses that redirect critical resources away from Rimuru's sphere of influence. At the same time, Shiro engineers a diplomatic standoff between two mid-tier states aligned with Rimuru, forcing him to either intervene and expend capital or risk losing ideological momentum. The arena grows tense. The projected world map begins to fracture along invisible fault lines. Raphael calculates the branching outcomes. Direct intervention stabilizes one region but weakens another. Non-intervention preserves reserves but risks a cascading loss of trust. Optimal path remains unclear because Blank is layering contingencies within contingencies. Rimuru watches the simulation without visible strain. He recognizes the pattern now. Blank plays like a perfect predator. They create dilemmas where every answer costs something. So he refuses the premise. Instead of choosing between intervention and restraint, Rimuru restructures governance entirely. He decentralizes authority across his simulated nation, empowering regional leadership with autonomous crisis response protocols. It is risky. Decentralization reduces direct control metrics. Sora's eyes sharpen. That move sacrifices centralized efficiency. But when the diplomatic standoff ignites, Rimuru does not spend resources to resolve it. The regional leaders act independently under the policies he established earlier. The conflict de-escalates internally without draining national reserves. Influence stability surges. Blank adapts instantly. They initiate information warfare, exposing minor inefficiencies within Rimuru's decentralized model and magnifying them through controlled media spread. Confidence begins to dip. Rimuru counters not by suppressing criticism, but by integrating it. Policy updates occur publicly. Feedback loops tighten. The simulation rewards adaptability with resilience bonuses. The audience begins to understand what is happening. Blank is playing to win the board. Rimuru is rewriting how the board evaluates success. Sora shifts again. If structural destabilization fails, target psychology. He triggers a simulated natural disaster within Rimuru's territory through a legal environmental event clause. Crops fail, supply chain strain, panic probability spikes. This is the first true crisis Rimuru cannot preempt entirely. Raphael floods him with mitigation strategies, rationing systems, trade imports, emergency powers. He chooses something slower: community mobilization incentives, citizen participation in reconstruction, shared burden rather than imposed control. It is not the fastest recovery model, but it increases long-term loyalty metrics beyond previous baselines. When the crisis stabilizes, Rimuru's nation emerges not weakened, but more cohesive. Shiro studies the data intensely now. The probability gap tightens further. Blank still leads in raw resource accumulation. But their advantage is no longer exponential. Sora exhales softly, smile widening not in mockery, but excitement. This is the first time in Disboard that an opponent refuses to optimize along conventional axes. Rimuru is not chasing victory through domination. He is constructing inevitability through alignment. Mid-game parameters unlock. Influence projection beyond national borders becomes available. Blank moves instantly, expanding trade dominance into distant regions. Rimuru does something unexpected. He does not expand outward. He invites integration inward. He offers cooperative frameworks rather than absorption. Smaller states voluntarily merge policy alignment without forfeiting identity. The influence graph spikes sharply. Gasps ripple through the arena. Blank's lead drops below critical certainty thresholds. For the first time since the match began, the outcome is no longer predictable, even to observers familiar with Blank's flawless record. Sora leans forward, elbows on knees, eyes blazing with focus. Shiro's fingers move faster than before, recalculating layers of probability in real time. Across from them, Rimuru stands calm, golden eyes reflecting the simulated world reshaping under his philosophy. This is no longer just a match. It is a collision between two definitions of supremacy. The late phase unlocks without ceremony. The arena dims slightly as the simulation enters its final cycle. Endgame modifiers activate. Influence projection now converts directly into global dominance potential. One decisive sequence can end everything. Blank moves first. Sora abandons subtlety. He initiates a high-risk consolidation strategy, merging every trade network, every diplomatic agreement, every accumulated advantage into a single overwhelming economic surge. It is a controlled detonation of influence designed to drown Rimuru's nation in sheer scale. If it succeeds, the board will tilt irreversibly. Shiro synchronizes instantly, adjusting internal stability to absorb the shockwaves that such rapid expansion creates. Their coordination is flawless. No hesitation, no wasted motion. The arena trembles as Blank's influence value spikes dramatically. The projection shows smaller states gravitating toward them under the weight of inevitability. Spectators hold their breath. This is the kind of decisive finish Blank is known for. Raphael calculates defensive options. Direct counter-expansion carries severe overextension risk. The probability of mutual collapse rises sharply. Rimuru does not defend. Instead, he activates a dormant policy chain seeded during the early educational phase. Innovation breakthroughs cascade through his nation's systems. Agricultural efficiency surges. Energy production stabilizes. Communication latency drops to near zero. It does not look dramatic on the surface. No explosive graph spike. But beneath the metrics, something fundamental shifts. His nation's influence converts from growth-based to sustainability-based. It becomes resistant to external absorption. Blank's economic surge crashes against that resistance. Instead of folding, Rimuru's sphere holds, not by overpowering, but by refusing to fracture. Sora's eyes narrow. He pivots instantly, attempting a final maneuver. He offers a sweeping integration treaty to multiple neutral powers, leveraging the appearance of his overwhelming advantage. It is brilliant. Psychological inevitability is often more powerful than actual dominance. For a moment, the graph tilts again. Then Rimuru makes his final move. He issues an open framework proposal to every state on the board. No forced allegiance, no binding contracts, a cooperative network where each participant retains autonomy while sharing advancements. It is inefficient by traditional conquest standards. It offers less immediate control. But the simulation evaluates voluntary cohesion as the highest form of stable influence. One by one, neutral states align, not out of fear, not out of inevitability, out of strategic preference. Blank's treaty wave slows, then stops. The influence graph stabilizes, then it shifts. Rimuru's nation surpasses Blank's by a narrow but undeniable margin. The projection glows softly, acknowledging dominance through sustainable alignment rather than forced consolidation. Silence fills the arena. Shiro stares at the final metrics without blinking. Sora leans back slowly, exhaling through a grin that carries no bitterness, only exhilaration. The crystalline interface flashes, victory acknowledged. The wager activates. Blank remains sovereign over Elkia. That was never at stake, but Rimuru gains unrestricted access to the kingdom's recorded game archives. Centuries of strategic history are now open to him. Sora stands, stepping closer to Rimuru. His expression is bright, alive. You did not try to beat us at our own game. Rimuru meets his gaze calmly. There is no triumph in his eyes, only understanding. Winning was never about matching their optimization. It was about redefining the path to dominance. Shiro finally speaks, her voice quiet but clear. adaptation. Above the arena, the god watches with visible delight. The balance of Disboard has shifted, not broken, shifted. Blank has not lost everything. They have lost certainty. And as the crowd slowly finds its voice again, whispering about the first opponent to truly challenge the undefeated pair, Rimuru turns his gaze toward the floating horizon of this world. He has secured knowledge. He has proven compatibility with its laws. But this was only a test. Victory against Blank does not echo the way most victories do. There is no outrage, no riots, no desperate scramble for revenge. Disboard does not operate on wounded pride. It operates on recalculation. Within hours of the match's conclusion, sealed chambers open across distant territories. In floating citadels suspended above cloud lines, ancient beings review recordings with cold precision. In subterranean sanctuaries carved from crystal and bone, elders analyze probability shifts caused by a single name entering the hierarchy. Rimuru Tempest is no longer an anomaly. He is a variable. And variables must be tested. In a grand hall carved from white stone and lined with banners representing multiple races, representatives gather: flugel strategists, war-beast tacticians, Dhampir observers cloaked in silence. Even emissaries from lesser-known races stand in attendance. No swords are drawn. None would function anyway. But the tension is sharper than steel. The conclusion is unanimous. One victory can be dismissed as novelty, two as coincidence. But the pattern emerging from Rimuru's decisions suggests something else. He is not merely mastering games. He is identifying structural flex points within the 10 pledges themselves. That cannot be ignored. A formal multi-race challenge is drafted under strict compliance with the pledges, a chained sequence of games. Each loss compounds the stakes. Each victory escalates the wager. It is designed not just to defeat him, but to overload him, for simultaneous adaptation across conflicting rule sets. Rimuru receives the invitation in the Elkian archive chamber, surrounded by centuries of recorded brilliance. He reads it once. Raphael reads it 1,000 times. Multiple game formats, strategy, logic, probability, perception. Even metaphysical abstraction rounds where concepts themselves can be wagered. He understands immediately. This is not a challenge fueled by anger. It is containment. If he wins too easily, he destabilizes established supremacy. If he loses, the world reasserts equilibrium. He smiles faintly. Equilibrium is often just another word for stagnation. The venue is selected at the Axis Cathedral, a neutral structure floating at the convergence point of several race territories. Its architecture reflects Disboard's philosophy. No walls high enough to block vision. No shadows deep enough to hide intent. Everything is visible. Everything is binding. As Rimuru steps into the cathedral, the air hums softly. The 10 pledges are etched into the very light itself, shimmering above the arena floor. They are not written words. They are laws embedded in existence. The representatives stand opposite him in a semicircle. Not enemies, opponents, each wearing expressions carved from discipline rather than emotion. The lead flugel speaks first. The chain sequence will begin with a pure logic construct. No economy, no territory. A closed system where only deduction determines survival. Rimuru nods once. He has no need for bravado. The cathedral floor dissolves into darkness as the first construct forms around them. A void filled with floating geometric fragments, each representing a conditional statement. Truth and falsehood encoded into shifting shapes. One wrong assertion triggers penalty escalation in subsequent rounds. Raphael activates full synchronization. The game begins. Rimuru steps forward carefully, golden eyes scanning the floating fragments, each a node of potential consequence. The geometry is not random. It follows strict logical hierarchies, but within them, multiple paths coexist. The challenge is not speed, it is foresight, comprehension, and adaptation. The flugel representative moves first, extending a hand toward the nearest fragment. Light pulses along his fingertips, connecting nodes in rapid succession. The structure responds instantly, recalculating the logic chains, highlighting faults and redundancies. Each move seems flawless, born from centuries of disciplined thought. Rimuru does not rush. He analyzes the structure, not the moves themselves, but the underlying framework. Conditional dependencies, probability thresholds, cascading outcomes. Raphael lays them all bare in a stream of coherent thought. He identifies a subtle gap, one node whose dependency link has been codified incorrectly. It is not a flaw in the rules themselves, but a predictable oversight in how the representative's strategy accounts for compounded uncertainty. He reaches out, his hand hovering over the node. The cathedral seems to pause, the floating fragments holding their positions as if aware of the magnitude of this touch. Rimuru adjusts the link, redirecting conditional flows subtly. No dramatic pulses, no explosive magic, yet the consequences ripple instantly. The flugel's plan falters just enough. Not catastrophic, not irreversible, but enough to reveal an imbalance. The observers, other representatives, exchange glances, calculating whether this is an intentional maneuver or a fortunate anomaly. Rimuru steps further into the void. Each movement is deliberate. Each connection he touches realigns the construct to favor emergent patterns rather than impose dominance. He does not force control. He does not cheat the pledges. He simply navigates within them better than anyone else can. The Warbeast representative reacts next. His approach is instinctive, adaptive. Nodes vibrate beneath his touch as he attempts to outmaneuver Rimuru's subtle realignments. Probability spikes and dips as he recalculates in real time. Rimuru allows some pressure to build. He lets the Warbeast dominate certain fragments temporarily. It is not a concession. It is data collection. Each reaction, each overextension, each hesitation is logged, analyzed, and integrated into the ongoing solution framework. By the time the Warbeast believes he has gained an advantage, he is already operating in a controlled feedback loop orchestrated by Rimuru. Time in this space feels elastic. What seems like hours to the observers is mere moments for his consciousness. He is not merely playing the game. He is teaching it new possibilities, exploring edges of what the pledges themselves can contain without breaking. The Dhampir emissary moves last, silent and deliberate. She does not attempt to dominate. Instead, she probes for weaknesses, testing for inconsistencies, evaluating the systemic responses of both Rimuru and the other participants. A single node under her control reacts unexpectedly. A logic chain she assumed stable oscillates. Rimuru notices immediately. He stabilizes it without intervention. He does not overcorrect. He does not assert dominance. He simply provides the minimal structural guidance to allow the construct to self-balance. The first round ends. Observers watch silently as the floating nodes lock into place, projecting the outcome. Rimuru leads not by aggression, but by precision and adaptability. Murmurs ripple through the representatives. They have followed the 10 pledges for generations. They have believed that absolute compliance ensures stability. And yet here is a single newcomer navigating entirely within the laws, yet bending outcomes to his favor without breaking a single rule. Sora's voice echoes faintly in the back of Rimuru's mind through simulation analysis. Interesting. This is more than winning a logic game. This is proof. Proof that the pledges, rigid as they seem, have elasticity. They can be respected while still exploited by an intellect capable of seeing the subtle seams. The second round begins immediately. It is not logic alone this time. Resource allocation, diplomacy, and conditional obligation intertwine. Territories are awarded based on influence projections that now incorporate psychological modeling of every representative present. Rimuru does not hesitate. Each decision, each allocation is informed not only by immediate gains, but by emergent patterns across the system. He anticipates responses, not merely reacts, and the system responds in kind. The 10 pledges designed to enforce absolute equilibrium are beginning to strain. They do not break, not yet, but they flicker, tremble under the weight of an intelligence unbound by precedent. Each representative acts according to law, yet each move now feeds into a cascading uncertainty that no single faction can resolve alone. Rimuru observes, calculating not for victory alone, but for understanding. He must understand the limits of this world's binding laws, where they hold, where they bend, where they can be leveraged without breaking. And as the cathedral's light pulses with every shift in the floating construct, one undeniable truth becomes clear. Disboard is a system designed for perfection, but Rimuru is introducing variables it has never accounted for. The representatives tighten their focus. They do not show panic. They do not speak of fear. That would be meaningless. But their movements reveal subtle hesitation, micro-adjustments in hand positioning, brief pauses before executing calculated steps. The 10 pledges, once an unshakable foundation, now ripple under the weight of Rimuru's unconventional strategies. Rimuru observes every fluctuation. Each ripple is a signal, a clue. The pledges enforce obedience, but they do not enforce creativity. They cannot anticipate ingenuity. He exploits this silently. He aligns outcomes not by brute force, but by guiding the natural tendencies of the constructs and players toward inevitabilities that favor his objectives. The second round accelerates. Now, the arena tests diplomacy. Neutral factions are introduced into the simulation, each with predefined loyalty, resources, and susceptibility to persuasion. Rimuru does not negotiate overtly. He positions symbolic gestures, subtle incentives, and minimal interventions that ripple outward, causing a cascade of voluntary alignment. Influence spreads like invisible currents. Sora leans forward in his seat, visibly intrigued. Shiro's eyes flicker, processing variables at a pace unmatched by any other being in Disboard. Even blank, undefeated strategists feel the subtle pressure of unpredictability. Every decision Rimuru makes is lawful, yet outside the mental algorithms they had relied upon for centuries. The war-beast tactician reacts, overcompensating slightly for perceived threats. Minor errors accumulate. They are not game-ending, but enough to disrupt the delicate balance of strategy. The Flugel commander adjusts, trying to compensate, but the accumulated variables now strain her calculations. Each action triggers a chain reaction across the simulation, creating patterns that are mathematically sound but psychologically unexpected. Rimuru's awareness expands beyond the arena itself. Raphael monitors the entire construct and the behavior of every participant simultaneously. Probabilities, reactions, and system constraints merge into a single coherent strategy. For the first time, Rimuru experiences not the thrill of raw combat, but the absolute exhilaration of control over complex systems. The third phase of the chained games begins. It is abstract in design, combining economic simulation, environmental control, and social influence. Tiles of territory shift dynamically. Resources are redistributed according to calculated algorithms, and morale indices fluctuate based on projected population satisfaction. Each representative moves instantly to optimize outcomes, yet their optimizations now feed into Rimuru's broader strategy. He allows minor setbacks intentionally, a trade imbalance here, a slight unrest there. Observers note the inconsistencies and whisper among themselves. Even Blank feels a faint tremor of uncertainty. It is the first time they cannot predict him fully. Rimuru's moves appear subtle, almost passive, but the consequences are monumental. He does not seek to dominate directly. He redirects flows, adjusts parameters, and nudges emergent behaviors toward stability and expansion simultaneously. Every unit, every node, every abstract concept in the chained game aligns not to attack, but to evolve. The 10 pledges themselves begin to exhibit their limits. They were designed to enforce perfect compliance, to maintain equilibrium, to prevent chaos, but they cannot anticipate an agent capable of seeing multiple layers of interaction and exploiting structural elasticity without violating the laws. The pledges resist overtly, constraining outcomes where possible, yet Rimuru maneuvers within those constraints so efficiently that the rules strain without snapping. The fourth round introduces meta-rules designed to counter agents like Rimuru. Multi-layered contingencies, nested conditions, and recursive dependencies intended to trap him in paradox loops. Any ordinary player would falter, forced to abandon critical calculations to survive the logic mazes. Rimuru approaches them calmly. He does not overthink. He does not panic. He treats the meta-rules as another layer of the environment to be understood, mapped, and integrated into a system of decision-making. He allows the loops to form and resolves them with simple, elegant solutions that maintain compliance with the 10 pledges while redirecting the outcomes to his advantage. Observers gasp as cascading domino effects unfold. The war beast's attempted traps collapse harmlessly. The Flugel's recursive contingencies redirect their own resources inadvertently toward Rimuru's advantage. Even Blank's coordinated predictions fail to account for the simultaneous self-stabilizing feedback he has engineered. By the final phase of the chained sequence, it becomes undeniable. Rimuru is not merely winning. He is demonstrating that adherence to the 10 pledges does not guarantee supremacy. The pledges are a framework, not an absolute safeguard. The equilibrium they enforce is conditional, and Rimuru has found the edges. The cathedral's light pulses faster. Floating constructs hover in precarious suspension, reflecting the systemic tension. Every representative realizes the same truth simultaneously. The rules they have relied upon for centuries are flexible, and Rimuru has mastered the exploitation of that flexibility without breaking a single law. Even the god watching from above leans forward slightly, a faint smile tracing his lips. Rimuru's gaze remains steady. He is not seeking chaos. He is seeking understanding. And as the last round begins to unfold, one reality becomes terrifyingly clear to every participant. Disboard is no longer predictable. The 10 pledges, once thought unbreakable, are now subtly bending under the weight of his intellect and strategy. Every decision from this point on carries greater consequence. Every move by the representatives is shadowed by the knowledge that the laws themselves can be navigated in ways previously unimagined. And Rimuru, calm and precise, stands at the center of it all, ready to continue pushing the limits of this world's perfection. The final phase of the chained games begins, and the cathedral itself seems to react. Light refracts across the floating constructs, forming patterns no observer could anticipate. Every tile, every node, every abstract variable pulses with the weight of decisions made and consequences yet to manifest. The representatives are no longer operating in isolation. Their collective attention shifts in a delicate ballet, influenced subtly by Rimuru's systemic manipulations. Sora leans forward, voices a quiet hum as he issues commands to the Flugel forces within the simulation. Every action is calculated, precise, intended to corner Rimuru within the legal boundaries of the 10 pledges. Shiro, as always, moves in perfect synchronization, her fingers flying across the control interface as she projects probabilities into visual overlays only she can fully comprehend. Together, they are formidable, an unbroken unit that has never lost. Rimuru does not flinch. Every decision he makes is deliberate, weighted against thousands of potential responses simultaneously. He allows minor setbacks intentionally, giving Blank the illusion of control. Each apparent concession is a calculated investment, a way to draw the strongest reactions and reveal structural tendencies that he can exploit in subsequent turns. The War Beast representative moves next, pushing their units toward Rimuru's territory, trying to manipulate resource flows and influence indexes. The system reacts predictably, exactly as Raphael had anticipated. Rimuru guides the cascade gently, redirecting the flow without exerting visible force. To the audience, it seems effortless, almost serene. Rimuru's strategy is no longer about victory in the conventional sense. It is about proving a principle, that absolute laws, even ones as strict as the 10 pledges, contain inherent elasticity. The pledges enforce compliance, but they do not dictate innovation. They cannot prevent adaptation. Rimuru does not break the rules. He bends their interpretation, operating at the outer edges where law and logic meet. And in doing so, he introduces a new variable into the system itself. Blank senses the shift. Sora narrows his eyes as he notices patterns emerging that his calculations did not fully account for. Shiro's fingers hesitate for the first time. Just a fraction of a second, but it is enough. The predictive certainty that has guided them for centuries falters. Rimuru observes silently, noting every micro-adjustment, every tiny delay. The cathedral's constructs quiver under the weight of systemic strain. What was once a rigid network of absolute rules now exhibits subtle inconsistencies. They are not failures, not yet, but they are cracks, hints that the 10 pledges, for all their perfection, are not infinite. The next series of turns unfolds like a dance. Rimuru allows economic pressures to mount slightly within certain regions, creating tension without collapse. He introduces controlled social unrest in peripheral territories to test the reaction patterns of Blank and the other representatives. Every action is legal, fully compliant with the pledges, yet every consequence nudges the system closer to instability. Sora recognizes the danger instinctively. He adjusts trade routes, reallocates influence, and attempts to counteract the subtle manipulations. Shiro recalculates defensive probabilities, trying to patch the structural gaps Rimuru has identified. Every adjustment they make is fed back into the simulation, and Rimuru integrates it effortlessly, predicting their responses 2 steps ahead. The representatives are now operating in an unprecedented environment. They follow the pledges perfectly, but Rimuru's strategies operate on a higher layer, where compliance is maintained while control is redistributed through indirect influence. It is elegant, precise, and devastatingly effective. As the rounds continue, the cracks in the 10 pledges widen imperceptibly. Minor inconsistencies ripple outward, affecting neutral factions, resource flows, and psychological indices. Disboard itself seems to react, as if the very laws etched into existence are recalibrating under the weight of Rimuru's intellect. Even the god watching from above leans forward, his expression one of rare intrigue. Disboard has never encountered a being capable of navigating the pledges with such precision, using compliance itself as a weapon. By the final moments of the chained games, it is undeniable. Rimuru has demonstrated that the 10 pledges, for all their rigidity, are not absolute. They can be exploited, stretched, and subtly redirected without ever being broken. Every representative present understands the implication. The foundations of Disboard's law, once thought unassailable, are now malleable in the hands of an intellect capable of seeing their hidden seams. Rimuru stands at the center of the cathedral, calm and composed. The light pulses around him, reflecting the fractures he has introduced into a system designed for perfection. Influence is no longer measured by dominance or force, but by adaptability, foresight, and the ability to navigate the subtle flex points hidden within absolute law. The 10 pledges have not failed, not yet, but they are no longer unchallengeable. And for the first time, every participant in the cathedral knows that the balance of Disboard itself has shifted. The aftermath of Rimuru's demonstration with the 10 pledges reverberates across Disboard in ways that no conventional army ever could. No banners are raised, no weapons clash, no territory burns. Yet tension rises, spreading like a silent storm across every continent, floating city, and hidden sanctuary. Nations begin to shift policies. Trade routes are subtly altered. Alliances, once considered unbreakable, now wobble under the unseen influence of a single strategic mind. Rimuru does not march into war. He does not summon armies. He moves through systems, laws, and probabilities, directing influence as precisely as a general commanding legions, but without a single soldier taking a step into combat. The concept of war has transformed. Here, victory is not measured by bloodshed, but by adaptation, efficiency, and the ability to compel others to act within their own laws and rules. Across Elkia, nobles notice that territories under Rimuru's growing influence begin to flourish unexpectedly. Supply chains optimize themselves, economic growth accelerates, and social stability strengthens without overt intervention. Observers who follow conventional patterns see no cause for alarm, yet subtle signs, long-term productivity spikes, loyalty metrics, and cooperative compliance reveal an invisible hand reshaping the world. Meanwhile, the Flugel strategists and war beast tacticians begin responding, not with swords or magic, but with counter-influence operations. Diplomatic initiatives intensify. Resource allocations are redirected. Policies are rewritten. The conflict manifests as a clash of intellect and strategy rather than brute force, yet the consequences are just as tangible. Neutral nations are drawn into the ripple effects, their choices subtly coerced by incentives and disincentives that do not break the 10 pledges, but bend them. Rimuru watches it all calmly, processing every shift, every reaction. Raphael integrates the data in real time, mapping consequences not only across the immediate territories, but through recursive chains that extend centuries into the future. Every decision made by a rival, every adjustment of policy, every attempt to counter his influence is predicted, accounted for, and incorporated into a larger system of control. The most fascinating element is psychological. No faction can engage Rimuru directly, yet every one of them feels the pressure of his strategy. Leaders act preemptively, anticipating moves that have not yet been made, effectively becoming players in a war where the battlefield is information, influence, and law. It is a war fought entirely within the constraints of the 10 pledges, yet its intensity rivals any historical campaign. In the floating cities of the Flugel, council chambers crackle with debate. Military resources are unused, yet decisions that could lead to actual combat are made, weighed, and redirected. Policies that would have governed troop deployment are reconsidered entirely. Every action must comply with the pledges, and every inaction carries its own consequences. Rimuru's presence has created a war that cannot be waged by conventional means. The war beasts respond with cunning. Their leaders begin to leverage cultural influence and resource redistribution to create tension within Rimuru's territories. They attempt economic blockades through legal trade restrictions, hoping to destabilize regions indirectly. Every tactic is sophisticated, designed to challenge his adaptability without violating the universal laws. Rimuru anticipates it all. He does not retaliate in kind. Instead, he engineers solutions that redirect the tension, turning potential crises into opportunities. Citizens act voluntarily in alignment with the policies he implemented earlier, stabilizing supply lines, reinforcing local governance, and generating unexpected efficiencies. What the war beasts intended as pressure transforms into further loyalty and influence for Rimuru. The cathedral records from the chained games replay in his mind. Lessons learned, strategies refined, patterns of behavior cataloged. Disboard is not an environment for random chaos. It is a system of rules, probabilities, and predictable responses. Every move by opponents, no matter how complex, feeds into a larger design he controls silently. Even Blank observes the subtle shifts with new caution. Sora and Shiro understand that Rimuru's influence now operates outside traditional countermeasures. They cannot strike him. They cannot force him into error. All they can do is adjust, react, and attempt to anticipate, a task that grows exponentially more difficult with every cycle of indirect conflict. Rimuru's war is a war of leverage, timing, and systemic influence. Entire economies adjust in real time to his policies. Entire societies act without coercion. And every nation that seeks advantage against him finds themselves ensnared in the unintended consequences of their own moves. This is a conflict without fire, without blood. Yet it is a war more absolute than any siege or battlefield. Diplomats and scholars across the world begin to refer to it as the silent campaign. Strategies once considered purely theoretical are tested in practice. Economic theories, political heuristics, and social engineering become weapons, and Rimuru wields them with flawless precision. Yet there is no chaos. There is no rebellion. Every adjustment, every shift remains fully compliant with the 10 pledges. It is a war waged entirely within the law, yet its scale and effectiveness are staggering. Disboard itself bends subtly, reshaping influence networks, resource flows, and alliances under his unseen hand. The first signs of fatigue appear, not in Rimuru, but among his opponents. Endless cycles of adjustment, counter-adjustment, and preemptive strategy strain even the most disciplined minds. The constant pressure of competing against a player who can predict and redirect outcomes without breaking laws begins to fray nerves. The very certainty that blank once relied upon wavers. For Rimuru, this is the ideal battlefield. He does not rely on brute force. He does not rely on magic or overwhelming strength. His victories are absolute because they cannot be resisted without violating the laws that govern this world. Every opponent acts voluntarily within the framework he understands fully, yet they unknowingly play into his strategy. The silent campaign intensifies. Cities flourish under guidance he subtly provides. Trade routes optimize themselves to favor stability. Resources flow where they are most effective. Disputes resolve without direct enforcement. Each move is calculated to maximize influence while minimizing resistance. And each success further strains the rigid assumptions embedded in the 10 pledges. Rimuru's golden eyes scan the floating horizon of Disboard. No explosions, no battles, no armies marching across borders, yet the world trembles beneath the weight of a war waged entirely without violence. Every faction, every nation, every strategist feels the pressure of an intellect operating on a level they cannot challenge directly. The stage is set for even greater consequences as the subtle fractures he has introduced continue to grow. The 10 pledges have maintained surface stability for centuries, but under Rimuru's calculated influence, the equilibrium begins to erode in ways that cannot be ignored. The silent campaign is only the beginning. The silent campaign spreads further, reaching corners of Disboard that even the most vigilant observers had assumed were immutable. Floating citadels, remote fortresses, and hidden sanctuaries all begin to show subtle signs of realignment. Resource flows redirect themselves naturally. Minor disputes between neutral factions resolve without intervention. Policies shift imperceptibly, nudged by Rimuru's indirect influence. Every adjustment is lawful, yet the cumulative effect is nothing short of revolutionary. Rimuru does not need to enforce obedience. His understanding of systems allows him to manipulate incentives so precisely that cooperation becomes the natural choice. Citizens, rulers, and advisors all act voluntarily, often unaware that their decisions are being guided. It is war without armies, without destruction, yet the outcomes are absolute. The factions attempting to counter him realize too late that they are moving in the direction he anticipated. Their efforts folded into a strategy they cannot resist. Sora and Shiro watch from the observation platform, studying every subtle shift. They had faced countless challenges and mastered the art of anticipating behavior, yet even they feel the pressure of Rimuru's predictive reach. Every economic maneuver, every diplomatic adjustment, every social policy he implements ripples outward, forcing instantaneous recalculations. Even Blank's legendary coordination begins to show cracks, not from failure, but from the strain of predicting a system so fluid and adaptable. The Flugel strategists convene emergency sessions, their normally flawless calculations now producing anomalies. A trade agreement that should have favored them suddenly benefits Rimuru's influence. A diplomatic negotiation engineered to stabilize a bordering nation instead consolidates loyalty toward his sphere. The system itself resists manipulation. Yet Rimuru's approach works with the laws rather than against them, bending probabilities in ways that leave the observers scrambling to respond. Meanwhile, the war beasts push subtle disruptions into Rimuru's territories, attempting to destabilize supply chains and influence networks. Every intervention is minor, calculated to avoid direct violation of the 10 pledges, yet their cumulative effect is designed to challenge him. Rimuru anticipates each move and channels it into outcomes that strengthen his control. What should have been disruption becomes reinforcement. What should have sown chaos instead seeds loyalty. Across Disboard, whispers begin. Merchants in distant cities remark on unprecedented efficiency. Nobles in capital towers notice rapid stabilization of regions previously fraught with unrest. Scholars in hidden libraries analyze policy reforms that emerge overnight without visible leadership. Observers everywhere begin to understand that a war is underway, yet no swords clash, no armies march, and no destruction occurs. Rimuru, observing from Elkia, integrates every detail. Raphael feeds him streams of data, probability analyses, and behavioral predictions from every corner of Disboard. Each interaction, no matter how small, is cataloged and incorporated into a constantly evolving strategy. Rimuru is not reacting in real time. He is orchestrating future outcomes with precision, guiding entire nations as if moving pieces on a cosmic chessboard. The pressure on Blank intensifies. Sora and Shiro realize that Rimuru's influence does not attack them directly, yet it reshapes the environment in which they operate. Their previous certainty, the foundation of their legendary coordination, begins to erode. Every decision they make is a response to a system that adapts faster than they can predict. They are forced into constant adjustment, the margin for error narrowing with each passing turn. Even the 10 pledges themselves seem to tremble under the weight of Rimuru's methods. They were never meant to prevent ingenuity, only to enforce obedience and equilibrium. Yet under his guidance, entire sequences of influence, trade, and policy move in ways that exploit subtle flex points within the laws. The system remains intact on the surface, but its underlying rigidity is stretched thin, creating cracks that only the most observant can perceive. The silent campaign reaches a critical stage. Rimuru introduces new policies that interlock economic stability, social loyalty, and diplomatic cohesion into a single self-reinforcing network. Minor conflicts are absorbed naturally, trade imbalances correct themselves, alliances solidify voluntarily. Every action by a rival faction feeds into this network, often unknowingly. Disboard has never experienced a war fought in this manner. No battlefield, no casualties, no magic explosions, yet the consequences are as tangible and permanent as any historic conquest. Entire regions realign, policies shift, and influence consolidates, all without overt enforcement. Rimuru has turned compliance itself into a weapon. The representatives, observing in real time, recognize a terrifying truth. Direct action against him is futile. Attempted manipulation only reinforces his control. Strategic resistance is absorbed into his designs. The very laws that define Disboard, meant to maintain order and equilibrium, are now instruments of his power. And through it all, Rimuru remains calm, composed, and unwavering. His golden eyes reflect a system bending subtly under his guidance. No armies clash, no territories burn. Yet the world shifts inexorably toward the outcomes he envisions. The war without violence is not only underway, it is reaching a point of irreversible momentum. The silent campaign reaches its apex as the cumulative effects of Rimuru's influence cascade across every layer of Disboard. In the floating citadels of the Flugel, Advisors notice trade patterns adjusting themselves almost instinctively. Supply routes previously considered optimal are subtly redirected to favor regions aligned with Rimuru's philosophy. Nobles murmur as their carefully calculated resource projections are quietly undermined by unseen efficiencies emerging from his policies. Every adjustment they attempt is absorbed into the network he has orchestrated, creating an invisible web of control that they cannot touch directly. In the War Beast territories, the leaders act on instinct and calculation alike, attempting to provoke minor instabilities in Rimuru's sphere. They introduce minor shortages, redirect migration flows, and initiate subtle policy conflicts, all designed to challenge his indirect governance. Yet every move is anticipated. Rimuru's adjustments are seamless, his interventions minimal, and yet each outcome consolidates his influence further. Regions that should have faltered under strain instead flourish, loyalty metrics climb, and systems stabilize without overt enforcement. The apparent chaos he allows only reinforces cohesion. Blank observes from a distance, Sora's eyes sharp with focused calculation, Shiro's fingers dancing over her console with precise, rapid movements. They have faced the most unpredictable and brilliant adversaries in Disboard history. Yet Rimuru's methods are unlike anything before. They cannot force a misstep. They cannot overwhelm him with traditional strategies, and every indirect action they take seems to reinforce his position rather than weaken it. For the first time, the undefeated duo experiences a creeping uncertainty that threatens to unravel the confidence that has carried them through centuries of victories. The 10 pledges, long considered absolute, begin to reveal their limitations under Rimuru's indirect strategies. Each law still functions perfectly on the surface, but the cumulative manipulations exploit the elasticity hidden within their structure. Compliance is maintained, equilibrium is ostensibly preserved, yet influence, loyalty, and resource allocation now shift in ways the architects of the pledges never intended. The rigid framework strains, flickers, and bends under a brilliance it was never designed to contain. Rimuru observes silently, golden eyes reflecting the shifting probabilities of every region, every faction, every minor actor across Disboard. His strategies are layered and recursive, guiding outcomes through a network of voluntary compliance that feels organic to the participants. No coercion is necessary, no rules are broken, and yet the consequences are absolute. Where conventional war relies on destruction and fear, Rimuru's war relies on structure, insight, and the subtle rechanneling of effort and loyalty. In Elkia, observers begin to whisper of miracles. Cities prosper under invisible guidance. Trade flourishes. Minor conflicts between neutral nations resolve peacefully, often before leaders are even aware of their escalation. Policy reforms propagate naturally, aligning with Rimuru's overarching objectives. Scholars study these changes, attempting to understand the mechanics of a war that leaves no casualties, raises no armies, and yet shifts power balances irreversibly. Every ripple of influence feeds back into Rimuru's calculations. Raphael tracks and synthesizes each adjustment, mapping systemic responses across multiple layers simultaneously. Every faction's reaction, every policy modification, every ripple of loyalty is processed, predicted, and incorporated into an evolving strategy that no single being could fully comprehend. The war is total, yet it leaves no visible scars. It is fought entirely through compliance, influence, and the subtle reshaping of the world's natural flows. Even the god who watches from above leans forward, intrigue evident in his expression. Disboard has never faced a war conducted in such a manner. No violence, no destruction, yet the consequences are just as permanent as any military campaign. Entire regions realign, policies are rewritten, alliances solidify, and influence consolidates, all without a single conventional battle. The silent campaign is not only waged successfully, it is rewriting the very meaning of conflict in this universe. By the end of this phase, it becomes undeniable to every observer and participant alike. Rimuru's approach has shattered the conventional understanding of war in Disboard. The 10 pledges have not failed outright, but they have been stretched beyond their intended purpose. They maintain order superficially, yet beneath the surface, the world has realigned according to the logic, foresight, and adaptability of a single mind. Leaders, scholars, and strategists across Disboard now understand a terrifying truth. Direct confrontation against Rimuru is futile. Attempts to undermine him only feed into the stability and expansion of his influence. Compliance itself has become his weapon. Laws, once absolute, now bend subtly under his guidance. Influence spreads silently, inexorably, reshaping entire nations without a blade being drawn. Rimuru stands amid Elkia, calm, composed, and unshakable. The golden light of the cathedral and the floating constructs of the simulation reflect in his eyes, each flickering a testament to the power of strategy over force. The world has changed. The 10 pledges remain, yet their perfection has been revealed as conditional. The silent campaign continues, unstoppable, demonstrating that the greatest wars need no violence, no armies, and no destruction to achieve absolute irreversible consequence. And as the sun casts its glow over the floating horizon of Disboard, it becomes clear that no faction, no strategist, and no god can truly resist the force of calculated influence executed with Rimuru's unmatched precision. The war without violence has only just begun, and its outcome promises to reshape the balance of the entire world. Before anything else, the cathedral falls silent. The floating constructs that had hummed with constant activity now drift almost motionless, reflecting the tension that grips every observer present. Rimuru stands at the center, golden eyes scanning the vast expanse of Disboard that stretches like a living map around him. The silent campaign has shifted the balance of power across continents, territories, and floating citadels, yet the ultimate test remains. Above it all, watching from a realm untouched by time, sits the god of Disboard. Tet, the architect of the 10 pledges, the deity whose whims define reality in this universe, observes the unprecedented chain of events unfolding below. He does not speak. He does not intervene. His curiosity is piqued in a way it never has been for millennia. Rimuru does not approach this final confrontation like others might approach a deity. He does not summon armies, call forth elemental forces, or attempt to overwhelm with raw power. Instead, he analyzes. He observes the patterns, the probabilities, the inherent logic of the universe itself, and the ways in which even a god's laws can be engaged, challenged, and, most importantly, anticipated. Every move in Disboard, every micro-decision of the nations, every ripple of influence from his silent campaign becomes part of a larger lattice, a system he can navigate with precision. This is a game beyond games, a strategy beyond strategy, and Rimuru is fully aware that the rules themselves have never been tested in this manner. Tet finally speaks, a voice that resonates through every plane of perception simultaneously. He offers a challenge that transcends conventional logic, a test of intellect, adaptability, and understanding. The god himself will engage Rimuru in a series of games where each move can rewrite reality, where victory and defeat are not measured by territory or currency, but by influence, foresight, and the manipulation of law itself. Rimuru smiles faintly, unshaken. This is the ultimate extension of what he has already been doing. A war fought entirely without violence, a campaign waged within the framework of absolute laws, yet bending those laws to achieve irreversible consequence. The arena manifests around them, larger than any battlefield in Disboard, encompassing floating islands, crystalline oceans, and structures that shift dynamically according to Tet's will. At the center, a translucent board emerges, representing the universe itself compressed into a playable system. Every continent, city, and faction is encoded as a node. Every law, every pledge, every hidden rule is a potential lever. Rimuru steps forward, absorbing the full complexity of the system. Raphael streams him the calculations, probability trees, and interaction matrices in real time. Even the god cannot obscure the mechanics that govern the universe entirely. Rimuru is capable of perceiving the hidden seams that exist between laws, the subtle flexibilities that allow influence to propagate in unexpected directions. Tet makes the first move. Reality itself bends. Probabilities shift and rules warp to create conditions no mortal or even immortal would normally anticipate. Nations collapse under invisible constraints. Alliances dissolve with a single, subtle shift in law, and the constructs of the arena twist in ways that defy linear logic. Yet Rimuru remains composed. He does not flinch. He does not hesitate. Every twist of reality is a pattern waiting to be decoded, every fluctuation a variable to be integrated. His understanding of Disboard's mechanics now extends beyond simple observation. He predicts responses before they occur, calculates optimal adjustments in real time, and directs the ripple of influence through systems both tangible and abstract. Tet's expression, though alien and incomprehensible to mortals, reflects fascination. He has watched countless mortals, immortals, and champions attempt to navigate his rules. None have ever achieved what Rimuru has achieved: to bend systemic laws without breaking them, to redirect outcomes without violating equilibrium, and to orchestrate entire societies as instruments of strategic alignment rather than coercion. The god realizes almost reluctantly that this is not merely a test of intelligence, but of ingenuity, insight, and philosophical mastery over the principles of governance, probability, and influence. The first phase of their engagement begins. Tet introduces conditions that merge probability manipulation, resource control, and ideological influence into a single metasystem. Entire continents are treated as variables. Entire populations are encoded as probability nodes. Every decision made by Rimuru will reverberate through the system with cascading consequences. Mistakes are not permitted, yet Rimuru operates with absolute clarity. He identifies the cracks in even a god's perfect oversight, subtle flex points where rules intersect but do not constrain each other fully. With every decision Rimuru makes, the arena responds. Nodes stabilize, influence spreads organically, and cascading systems resolve in his favor without a single direct violation of law. Tet reacts instantly, shifting conditions in an attempt to counter his moves. Probabilities spike, realities twist, and the very structure of the universe bends. Yet each of Tet's adjustments is absorbed into Rimuru's system. He does not confront the god directly. He does not challenge power with power. He leverages law, logic, and systemic insight, turning every divine intervention into an opportunity for consolidation. Observers across Disboard watch in disbelief. Floating citadels, previously secure under Tet's influence, show subtle signs of reorientation. Policies in neutral nations adjust without directive. Resource flows realign. Allegiances shift voluntarily. Rimuru's influence propagates through the architecture of law itself, demonstrating that even a god's intervention can be anticipated, analyzed, and incorporated into a strategy that cannot be resisted directly. Tet smiles faintly, a mixture of amusement, intrigue, and perhaps even respect. He understands the stakes have evolved beyond conventional play. No ordinary victory is possible. No direct confrontation will succeed. Rimuru has transformed the entire concept of engagement. The god himself is now playing on a board where law, influence, and insight are the only weapons, and Rimuru wields them with absolute mastery. The second phase of the game begins. Tet escalates conditions further, introducing layers of abstraction where influence, probability, and law overlap in complex, recursive loops. Errors are magnified, miscalculations compound, and the potential for systemic collapse grows with every move. Yet Rimuru navigates these layers flawlessly. He does not rely on speed or force. He does not dominate directly. He predicts emergent outcomes, aligns systems to favor stability and consolidation. and ensures that every move by the god, by chance and by opponent alike, is integrated into a lattice of outcomes that always edge toward his advantage. Rimuru's calm contrasts sharply with the unprecedented complexity around him. The god watches, eyes flickering with light, realizing that this is not merely a game, but a demonstration of how intelligence, insight, and understanding of systemic law can achieve outcomes that even the divine will cannot control directly. Checkmate is approaching, but not in the way any mortal or god has ever conceived it. Tet's next move ripples through reality with divine precision. Entire continents shift allegiance simultaneously. Trade networks reroute mid-transmission, and social stability indices fluctuate as if anticipating chaos. Every node on the metaboard becomes a live equation, probabilities cascading exponentially, outcomes multiplying with infinite permutations. Rimuru does not flinch. His golden eyes sweep over the lattice of reality, parsing every variable, identifying hidden interdependencies, and calculating the subtle leverage points that even a god cannot fully conceal. Rimuru's approach is not forceful. He does not attempt to overpower Tet directly. Instead, he engages in what can only be described as philosophical warfare, manipulating laws, incentives, and emergent behavior. Each adjustment he makes propagates through the system, subtly realigning nodes, reinforcing stability where needed, and redirecting influence to amplify outcomes in his favor. Tet reacts instantly, shifting conditions, adjusting probabilities, and introducing paradoxical loops designed to trap Rimuru in logical impossibilities. Yet every intervention is anticipated, every loop absorbed, every paradox transformed into a vector of control. The spectators, floating citadel observers, representatives of nations, even blank in hidden observation platforms, witness a level of strategy unlike anything ever recorded. Economic structures that should collapse instead stabilize. Diplomatic conflicts that should escalate instead resolve preemptively. Entire populations act in accordance with the optimal flow of outcomes, guided not by force, but by invisible alignment within laws and incentives. The silent campaign has evolved into a divine duel, waged entirely through compliance, influence, and calculated foresight. Rimuru shifts focus to the abstract layers Tet introduces, the meta-systems where law itself becomes fluid. Rules overlap, recursive dependencies emerge, and paradoxes threaten to destabilize entire territories. Here, the true genius of Rimuru's strategy manifests. He identifies the seams in the divine lattice, places his influence precisely where the system is most elastic, and nudges outcomes toward stability and expansion without ever violating the fundamental pledges. Tet can bend reality, but Rimuru bends it more subtly, without leaving a trace of violation. Sora leans forward from his observation perch, noting the elegance of the maneuver. Shiro's eyes widen ever so slightly, recognizing the sheer depth of predictive layering Rimuru employs. Even blank, undefeated strategists who have mastered every nuance of Disboard feel the creeping awareness that they are witnessing something beyond comprehension, a mortal, or at least a non-divine being, operating on a plane of intellect that can anticipate, absorb, and redirect divine power itself. Rimuru introduces the next layer of strategic influence. He propagates a network of voluntary compliance across multiple territories simultaneously. Minor economic incentives align with social structures. Diplomatic subtleties reinforce legal frameworks. Resource flows cascade in optimal patterns. Every move made by the god, every shift in probability, every paradox introduced is not countered with force, but integrated into this lattice, strengthening his influence further. Tet escalates the complexity, fracturing probabilities across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Alternate outcomes ripple backward and forward in time, looping recursive feedback into the current state of reality. The cathedral itself seems to warp, floating constructs bending in impossible angles as the meta-system folds in on itself. Spectators can only watch as the fabric of law and probability stretches to accommodate this duel. Rimuru's response is effortless in appearance. Each variable, each node, each paradox is calculated and integrated. He does not overcorrect. He does not react emotionally. He nudges, redirects, and guides, transforming Tet's interventions into vectors of stability and influence. The divine attempts to trap him, but Rimuru transforms traps into foundations, obstacles into catalysts for consolidation. The critical moment begins to emerge. Tet's systems show subtle signs of strain. Probabilities that should remain absolute begin to fluctuate unexpectedly. Recursive loops designed to spiral into chaos instead resolve predictably, outcomes consolidating in Rimuru's favor. Every nation, every faction, every neutral observer becomes an unwitting participant in a lattice of influence that Rimuru controls silently. Tet's expression, as much as a god can express emotion, shows intrigue and a hint of challenge. He recognizes that Rimuru is not merely surviving his manipulations, he is mastering them. He is exploiting systemic elasticity, finding optimal paths within absolute law, and achieving results that defy even divine expectation. The spectators realize the impossible. Rimuru is achieving checkmate not through force, magic, or brute power, but through an unparalleled understanding of law, probability, influence, and systemic design. Every adjustment made by the god reinforces the outcome Rimuru desires. Every intervention becomes a stepping stone, every paradox a tool for consolidation. The first threads of the checkmate are visible, subtle but unmistakable. Tet can manipulate reality, bend probabilities, and enforce divine laws. Yet even he cannot counteract the systemic alignment Rimuru has orchestrated. The divine duel has become a game of absolute intellect, where the pieces move themselves, outcomes resolve through law, and the victor is determined not by might, but by understanding the invisible seams of existence itself. Rimuru advances the final layer of his strategy. Every territory, every faction, every floating city in Disboard aligns within the lattice he has subtly constructed. Economic flows, diplomatic ties, and legal frameworks all interlock perfectly, each outcome feeding into the next, creating a self-reinforcing network that no direct intervention can disrupt. Tet's divine maneuvers, however powerful, are absorbed into this network. Each probability shift, each paradoxical loop, each adjustment in law intended to destabilize Rimuru's position becomes an unwitting contribution to his ultimate checkmate. The god watches, his expression unreadable yet clearly tinged with fascination. He has encountered mortals, immortals, and champions of incredible intellect, but none have demonstrated this level of systemic understanding. Rimuru does not seek to overpower him. Rimuru seeks to operate above and within the system simultaneously, bending every law to reveal its flexibility, predicting every reaction and integrating them flawlessly. Tet can manipulate probabilities, bend territories, and warp reality itself. But Rimuru's approach is fundamentally different. It is not about brute force or chaos. It is about insight, anticipation, and absolute strategic elegance. The metaboard, representing the universe compressed into nodes of influence, begins to settle. Probabilities stabilize, recursive loops resolve, and outcomes converge. Regions that should have been destabilized remain secure. Alliances that should have faltered instead strengthen voluntarily. Resource flows that should have broken down now operate with peak efficiency. Every move Tet has made, every divine shift, has only further solidified Rimuru's lattice of influence. Tet leans forward, intrigued. He realizes the depth of what has occurred. The god himself is facing a being who has mastered systemic influence to the point where even divine intervention is absorbed, anticipated, and redirected. Rimuru's checkmate is not violent, not overt, and not destructive. It is absolute because it cannot be resisted without violating the 10 pledges themselves. Even a god cannot undo the equilibrium he has engineered without contravening the laws that govern his own domain. Across Disboard, observers recognize the subtle but undeniable truth. The silent campaign has culminated in an unprecedented display of strategic mastery. Entire continents, floating cities, and nations have shifted under Rimuru's indirect guidance. Policies, trade, social dynamics, and allegiances have realigned entirely through voluntary compliance and systemic orchestration. The universe has been engaged in a war without violence, culminating in a checkmate that transcends conventional understanding. Tet finally speaks, voice resonating with both amusement and acknowledgement. He admits the unparalleled brilliance of Rimuru's strategy. A mortal, or perhaps a being beyond mortal comprehension, has demonstrated mastery over a system no god has ever expected to be challenged so thoroughly. Rimuru's approach is not simply genius, it is revolutionary, redefining the parameters of law, influence, and strategic dominance in Disboard. Even blank Sora and Shiro, observing with all their skill and experience, are left in awe. They recognize that this is not merely a victory of intellect, it is a demonstration of systemic supremacy, a proof that compliance and law themselves can be weapons when wielded with insight, precision, and foresight. Rimuru has not been destroyed, not coerced, not dominated directly. He has orchestrated an outcome that is absolute, irreversible, and undeniable. The checkmate is complete. Disboard has been fundamentally altered not through violence or overt conquest, but through strategic mastery that even a god cannot counter directly. The 10 pledges remain intact, yet they now carry a subtle proof of elasticity, a reminder that even the most absolute laws have points of leverage for those who can perceive them. Rimuru steps back, golden eyes scanning the now settled metaboard. Calm, composed, and unshaken, he surveys the outcomes of the silent campaign and the divine duel. Influence, loyalty, resources, and alignment have been perfected across Disboard, achieving an order that is simultaneously lawful and unassailable. Tet, observing from his divine plane, nods subtly in acknowledgement, conceding that this checkmate is beyond even divine anticipation. The victory is not loud, it is not destructive, but it is absolute. Rimuru has demonstrated that intelligence, insight, and mastery over systemic laws can achieve outcomes no force of arms or divine power could disrupt. The ultimate lesson is clear. War need not be violent. Influence need not be overt. And even a god can be outmaneuvered by brilliance operating within the rules. And with that, the universe of Disboard stabilizes under a new equilibrium, a testament to the strategic genius of Rimuru, the being who achieved the impossible. Before we wrap up, let me hear from you. What would you have done differently if you were Rimuru in this universe? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this strategic showdown unfold, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because in LoreCity, we bring you the battles that redefine reality. Until next time, keep exploring, keep imagining, and remember, the greatest victories often come without a single strike.